right away. Our next change speaker is Sulemana Issifu. He's a young academic and a scientist. He has expertise in plant microbe interaction, microbial ecology, metagenomics, or environmental microbiology, and sustainable agriculture. He's a research fellow of the Hans Rothenberg Institute of the University of Hohenheim, Germany's leading life sciences research university. Sulemana is also a climate change activist who has led advocacies through the Center for Climate Change and Food Security, where he's a founding member and the director of research, to influence policies and raise awareness about climate change in Africa. Aside his expertise as a microbial ecologist, he is a strong social activist and an anti-corruption crusader who believes in accountable governance. Sulemana has written many articles on corruption and publicly shared his views on pressing national issues in Ghanaian tabloids. He's speaking to us today. Is Ghana's ecosystem at a tipping point? Thank you very much, Sulemana, for making time to join us. Please unmute your microphone.
Sorry. Thank you, Samson, for having me.
And I've been following you a bit, checking up where you have been. I think you have been somewhere in the UK, you have been elsewhere, and you also were speaking, was it to Deutsche Welle, on the matters of environment and climate change very recently. Where are you speaking to us from today?
Today I'm speaking from Stuttgart, Germany. Right. Yes.
Okay. I discovered you are a fellow of a particular institute that went on a certain research to the UK. Remind me of that again.
Yes. So for the UK, I went to the UK as a visiting researcher and scholar at University of Aberdeen. My institute actually in Germany here also embarked on a research, a very important research in Ghana. And I would like to share some of the details of this research with your listeners and probably raise awareness about this particular research, which has been forgotten by policymakers.
So let's hear you. Is Ghana's ecosystem at a tipping point?
Okay, so thank you very much, Samson. So thank you for deeming me worthy of invitation, and I'm very pleased to be on a panel with distinguished fellows. So when this invitation was given, I decided to ask a few people within my circles of academics, intellectuals, friends, and my question was very simple. I asked them, if you were given the opportunity to isolate one problem of Ghana, which demands or which needs urgent attention, what problem are you going to mention? And to my utter shock, I had diversity in the opinions that I received from my respondents. So because of that, I said, okay, then let me fine-tune the question further so that maybe I can have a consensus response from my respondents. So I drilled the question down by asking, okay, I want you to mention one problem that if it were solved, the effect of it would permeate every sector of the Ghanaian system. And even with this very specific and direct pointed question, I still did not have consensus. So what that told me was that the problems of Ghana are really myriad, and that if you were to put everybody or anybody in charge of Ghana, everyone would have everyone will have their own opinions on what should be solved, what problem demands urgent attention. So then I devised a theory myself and said that then I believe that everybody should work towards their own visions for Ghana. So that if you're a lawyer, you have to work to make the judiciary a very clean system. If you are an environmental scientist, you have to work to make the environment, Ghana's environment, worthy of consideration. And if you are a medical doctor, like your guests, you have to work to improve the health delivery system in Ghana. So everybody should work in their respective areas of interest with the hope that collectively, by working in your areas of interest, if you're a journalist, by working in the area of your interest, collectively would have the Ghana that we desire. So Samson, the question was towards the Ghana that I seek. So I have a wish list. I want to see Ghana where policy is informed by science and research, and not by political sentimentalism, and not by only political consideration. That is number one, the kind of Ghana that I want to see. I also want to see a Ghana where public institutions work professionally in the strategic interest of the state and not in the strategic interest of any one individual. My third wish list is I want to see a Ghana where young people can achieve their aspirations, can achieve their ambitions without having political godfathers, so that opportunities are only given to people who know someone somewhere up there. I don't want to see a Ghana like that. So these are the three wish lists that I have. And now to my question as to whether Ghana's ecosystem is at a tipping point. This is a very difficult question, because when you look at the ecosystem is an interaction of all biological organisms and their physical world. And the ecosystem has specific services, or have some special services that it renders to the people. And once you tilt the balance in the ecosystem, you are likely to have a situation where human beings are going to suffer. So the minor things that are in the environment, the microorganisms in the soil, these are the things that sustain human lives. And if we don't take care of these things very well, we are all going to suffer for it. And basically, there are two things. And when we say a tipping point is a point where the ecosystem can no longer absorb or can no longer resist the perturbations or the disturbances that have been pushed on it. And this can come from two main sources. It could be from the natural or artificial. The natural includes, for example, climate change. And the artificial usually are anthropogenic, which means that these are things, or these are perturbations or disturbances that are imposed by human activities. And these human activities are very important whenever we talk about protecting the environment and protecting the ecosystem from reaching the tipping point. Because the tipping point has consequences that most times are very debilitating. One of the consequences of reaching the tipping point or crossing the tipping point threshold, I have defined what the tipping point is. One of the consequences is that you lose essential biodiversity. A second consequence is that the ecosystem has its own way of regulating itself and making it habitable, or making it to support, it has a way of regulating itself in order to support human life and human existence. So once you perturb it or you disturb it, then this regulatory function of the ecosystem is lost. So for example, water purification, the underground water, the water table, the ecosystem has a way to purify the water table and make it drinkable for humans. And once you disturb the ecosystem, you are going to lose all of these. And at this point, I would love to ask your producer to show a short clip, and then we see if Ghana is pushing ourselves today. So Samson, what you're seeing, or viewers, what you're seeing is a shot that was taken as recent as 9th December on the white Volta. I got this video from Metro TV. And for anybody who is watching this, this is the white Volta that has become turbid, that is almost in a slurry state, which depicts that Galamsey has not been solved. So we still have Galamsey going on, and by continuously doing Galamsey, we would be pushing Ghana's ecosystem to the tipping point. And I've mentioned some of the consequences of crossing the tipping point threshold. We lose biodiversity. This biodiversity is very important because, for example, in our agricultural system, some microorganisms are responsible for plants to be able to take up nutrients. And once you disturb the ecosystem, you lose these microorganisms. And the effect is that we are going to see what we call crop failures. We are going to see crop epidemics. Then this will threaten your food security system and make agriculture very expensive to undertake. So when you have Galamsey going on, I will not be surprised that in the next few years, we are going to see crop failures. Our plants are going to die. They will not be able to survive in the ecosystem because the ecosystem has been disturbed, and our important microorganisms and biological organisms that sustain the plant life, which in turn sustain the human lives, are going to be lost. And this is why I was surprised when we had a professor who came up with evidence to show that mercury ingestion, which he said he traced to mining areas, had led to deformed babies. And yet the outrage from the Ghanaian people was one of indolence, one of quietism. So we did not show enough outrage. I'm here to disturb the peace of Ghanaians more and to tell them that if we continue this trajectory, the regulatory function of water purification, the ability of the ecosystem to purify the water table and make it drinkable to all of us, we are going to lose it. And that is why you have many studies saying that if we continue in this trajectory, in the next 20 years, we will not have drinking water, both surface and underground. And it is because the ecosystem would have crossed the tipping point. And mostly, when the ecosystem crosses the tipping point, you are unable to reverse it. Or even if you're going to reverse it, it will take extreme effort to be able to reverse it. And I asked myself, why would we wait to reach that point where we have to struggle and spend meager and scarce resources of the state to be able to reverse something that we should be able to stop it right now or never? And I'll ask the producer to show the next video where my institute undertook a research, and fortunately there were Ghanaian scientists on this project, but this project was initiated by the German government, who initiated and funded this project known as the Mercury Project, or Legumes for Choice Project. And this project basically looks, and this project was reported by Joy FM actually. This project basically looks at how to use what we call phytoremediation or bioremediation to remediate soils that have been contaminated by lead, mercury, and other heavy metals from these artisanal mining or Galamsey illegal mining areas. In some sense, I must tell you a story. I have some challenges, professional challenges, but I would say it anyway in the interest of Ghana. When I was first recruited in my institute, and my PI, the principal investigator on the project, was showing me around and introducing people to me. He introduced someone who would later become a very close friend of mine, Yachin, who is a Chinese lady. And my PI told me that, so this lady is responsible for screening microorganisms that have the potential to rehabilitate soils that have been contaminated as a result of artisanal mining. And he told me that this lady is using Ghana as a case study. So, I mean, my intuitive nationalistic sense asked, you know, the conflict that arose in my mind, that the Chinese was responsible for investigating how to use microorganisms, specifically fungi, to remediate soils that have been contaminated, and Galamsey sites in Ghana are the study sites. I don't want to explain, or I don't want to stress this any further, but I mean, you know the kind of conflict that I would have as a Ghanaian in my mind. And I waited 2 years later when I went to the field with my PI. I reminded him of what he told me, and then told him my challenge as a Ghanaian when I saw my friend Yachin being responsible. But there are Ghanaians on this project, something. And they have been able to identify candidate microorganisms that have the potential to immobilize or that have the potential to stop the uptake of mercury by plants. Now, when the mercury is taken up by the plants, mind you, the mercury stays in the tissues of the plant, which means that if you are in Accra and the mining area is in, let's say, any Galamsey site anywhere in the world, or in Ghana, you could have mercury right on your table while you are eating, because the plants have the ability to take up the mercury and translocate it or put it in the tissues of the plant. So if it is tomato that is coming from the Galamsey site, you would have mercury right on your dining table. You'll be ingesting or eating mercury. And that is why Professor Sampeni found that babies were being born with deformities that he says throughout his professional career had never seen a similitude of it. And yet Ghanaians were not outraged. So the point is that with the continuous Galamsey, and I say that Galamsey is not an overflogged issue, because any matter that is of existential consequence cannot be overflogged and must be spoken about forever and ever until that action is completely dwarfed or completely defeated. Anything that has existential consequences, we must continue to fight it until it is no longer, because once it exists, it means that human lives are at risk. And that is why I have a very beautiful definition of a Galamseya, which I want to read to Ghanaians. I say that a Galamseya is a voracious person who is driven by avarice and only satisfies his insatiable greed by destroying the very things that sustain human existence, i.e., water, environment, ecosystem, etc. A Galamseya puts gold ahead of human life and sets out to pollute the environment deliberately with heavy metals like mercury and lead. A Galamseya excavates an entire community in order to get few grams of gold. A Galamseya is a selfish, cruel, wicked, and vicious person. The similitude of a Galamseya is Adolf Hitler. A Galamseya is in fact an environmental terrorist. And I know that every country has anti-terrorism law. And if we are going to consider Galamseyas as environmental terrorists, then we should have anti-environmental terrorist laws to curtail Galamseyas who are putting all of us at risk. The question as to whether Ghana's ecosystem is at a tipping point cannot be answered. The reason is simple. We have not made sufficient use of science to collect data on biodiversity that we have. The last check that I made, our biodiversity data was collected as far back as 1965. And since then, we don't have, for example, a national bank of data on essential microorganisms that exist in Ghana that make life habitable for plants, which in turn make life habitable or life possible for humans. And because of this, I told a friend, I think Dr. Kwame Sapon Asidu, I had a discussion with him. And I told him that even in future, if Ghanaians decide to be rational and decide that we have to revisit the reclamation of our Galamsey destroyed site, I doubt if we'll be able to do the reclamation because what exactly we have lost, we don't know. So what microorganisms we've lost, we don't know. We don't have the data on that. So when we say we want to reclaim, what is the baseline for reclamation? What exactly are we going to reclaim? We will not be able to do that.
Right.
And this is a source of worry. And that is why I say I want a Ghana where state institutions work in the strategic interests of our country. And as someone in the diaspora, we cannot be reticent. We cannot say we don't care about Ghana because we have families in Ghana and we intend to relocate in Ghana to assist in the forward march of our country. And before I conclude, I want to state also very briefly whether our state institutions have also reached a tipping point. And when I say a tipping point for state institutions, very briefly in 1 minute, It is the point where people accept the fact that state institutions don't have to act. They have to be indolent. They don't have to be efficient. If we reach that point, then our state institutions are in trouble. And I use the Ghana Scholarship Secretariat as an example. I propose that we should scrap the Ghana Scholarship Secretariat and constitute it into an authority regulated by law, because the Ghana Scholarship Secretariat has become an institution for tokenism, and their strategic role in Ghana is missing. We need to reassess if we really want to keep it under the presidency, where the Scholarship Secretariat is rather used to promote party faithfuls. I believe that the Scholarship Secretariat can be structured in a way to fill the human resource gap that we have. Why should Ghana, for example, be hiring engineers to assist in some projects? Why should Ghana be hiring lawyers in some cases at international levels? Why should Ghana be hiring doctors at some for some particular treatments? If the Scholarship Secretariat plays a strategic role in Ghana's development, we will be able to fill all these human resource gaps. And that is why we must put in place stringent accountability mechanism for the Ghana Scholarship Secretariat, so that they report on how many people have been given scholarships, why they were given the scholarships, have they returned back to Ghana, have they been integrated, and what role are they playing since they returned to Ghana. This is a very important step that we need to take if Ghana would become the Ghana that we want.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you very much,
Sulemana. I have only one question for you, because we have done a bit over your time. You say that the biodiversity data that we have is one we collected in 1965. What's the standard within the periods by which this data is supposed to be collected?
So, Samson, there's no standard, but then as a country, we must have this data reviewed, every now and then, because the ecosystem, you don't have control over the ecosystem. So you would want to know what you have and be able to refill it whenever you lose it. So what's
the reasonable period within which
the reasonable
intervals?
Period, I would say, it must be a continuous process. So, for example, in Europe, and you know that I'm involved in an European project that is investigating what we call nature-based solutions. So, in Europe, for example, every now and then there are studies going on to discover new, new biota or new biomes. So, it must be a continuous process. But even if we don't have the resources to do that, at minimum, every 15 years, I propose that we should have, and especially in the areas that we are disturbing, in the Galamsey areas, immediately, I am proposing to the government to move in immediately and begin to collect data of the biodiversities around those areas, so that when we become rational people and we want to restore those areas, we will be able to do so, because we will know exactly what we've lost.
I said one question, but you have referred accurately to what the physicians have told us, that Galamsey has led to situations where we are now having deformed babies. And still, you say we are not at the tipping point?
Yeah, so the tipping point would come when revegetating the areas that have been destroyed becomes impossible. The tipping point would come when our water is not able to self-purify, so that our underground water is poisoned. I'm not sure if we've reached that point, because we don't have the data to show whether we've reached that point or not. Our physician, probably in the health ecosystem, we've reached the tipping point. But in the classical definition of the environment and ecosystem, we are yet to know, because government is not even investing in,
regardless of the fact that
but as to whether we've reached or crossed the tipping point threshold, it requires very thorough scientific inquiry.
Thank you very much. Sulemana Issifu is a young academic and a scientist, and his expertise in the areas that he has chosen to speak to us about on the topic is Ghana's ecosystem at a tipping point. We will take a quick break. We'll return to introduce our next guest.